be in studio to share their reporting and their insights. CNN's Caitlin Collins, Sungmin Kim with The Washington Post, CNN legal analyst Shan Wu, and CNN's crime and justice reporter Shimon Prokopez. Shimon, I want to start with you in the sense that you're familiar with the judge. You're very familiar with the case. The fact that she is taking her time to go through each of the counts and to make clear, sorry, Mr. Stone, I dispute everything your side has said about the politics here, about you being railroaded here. What does that tell you?
It says that, look, that we have been waiting to hear from her for quite some time now, right? There have been attacks lobbed at her by the president. There have been attacks by Roger Stone. She made a point in raising that just before she took the break, saying how the threats against her on social media, talking about that and how it's intolerable to the administration of justice, and to say that that kind of behavior by Roger Stone is just Roger being Roger is unacceptable. She has obviously taken this very seriously. Key in all this, and this is what's going on now, is her going over the threats to a witness here. This is what's also a very important part of this case, is the fact that Roger Stone threatened a witness here. It's not just about him lying to Congress. The more important point here is that he threatened a witness, and that is what she's going over now. It does sound like she's going to give him a couple of years or so. We don't know, obviously, but she is going over everything that would seem to indicate that she isn't, perhaps, we don't know this yet, isn't going to go as light as on him as he would like, and certainly his team, and certainly the president.
Certainly the president. And again, part of the subplot of all of this is the expectation is, if you look at the president's Twitter feed, that he'll eventually pardon Roger Stone. The question is, when will he do such a thing? First, we're going to see what the judge says. And so, Shan, I know the answer is no. So how do you handle a case where you're on the prosecution or the defense, or you're the federal judge who has been directly attacked repeatedly by the President of the United States? How do you wall that out and make a decision that says this is about the facts of the case, this is about the law, this is about comparative sentencing and the guidelines, this is not about the fact that the President of the United States is in my face almost every day now?
Well, she's very well suited for this. She's very calm under pressure. When I was before her, and ages ago in the Gates case, she handled that publicity very well. She's going to focus on the facts and the law in front of her, but it's really an extraordinary situation. I mean, I've never seen something like this. The other lawyer, quote unquote, in the courtroom is Donald Trump, and the judge is directly addressing his arguments through building this case, telling the world, telling the public, this is a just case, and don't pay attention to what the president's been saying. That's what's really going on here.
But that is really what's going on here, and the president, obviously, he's trying to influence the judge. We don't think he's going to succeed in that regard because she is viewed as very tough and independent. But just this morning, Caitlin Collins said the president has attacked the judge, he's attacked the process, he's attacked the Mueller investigation now going on years plus. They say Roger Stone lied to Congress at CNN. I'm glad he's watching. Oh, I see, but so did Comey, and he leaked in classified information. The president goes on, and so did Andy McCabe. You have to be careful when you read the president's tweets because a lot of the back half of them is not necessarily factual, or at least not contextual. But as the hearing is underway, the president knows the sentencing is underway. And there he is.
And I think we all realize that he is not going to influence whatever decision she makes today. She's not going to let the president's tweets do that. But what he could be making the case for is if he does pardon Roger Stone, he's already building his argument for why he should do so, arguing that she's biased, arguing that the jury wasn't unbiased in this situation, making these cases for why he should pardon Roger Stone. And I mean, it's pretty clear what he's been thinking of. Even though yesterday he denied to us that he's been considering whether or not he should pardon him, we know that several people he's spoken with have been talking to him about this, and there have been people lobbying the president to pardon Stone. And of course, it comes on the wake of these other pardons and commutations we saw this week. One interesting thing about his attacks on the judge is that is something that has really gotten under Bill Barr's skin. He does not like that the president is going out and attacking this judge who they have a case before, and the president has not, subsided in those attacks at all.
And part of the argument here, whether you're the Attorney General or anybody else watching this, is even if you accept the argument that the Mueller investigation never should have existed, even if you accept that argument, it doesn't give you the right to lie to Congress, doesn't give you the right to threaten witnesses. If you tell the truth in those investigations, if it's an illegitimate investigation, assuming that if you tell the truth, no harm, no foul. But Sungmin, this is another case where we know the president, he'll get advice from the Justice Department. I suspect it would be, as the Attorney General said in the interview with ABC, please stop live tweeting and meddling in my cases publicly. That's not helpful. But we also know that he gets his advice somewhere else, whether it comes to a case like this or some of these pardons, these issues, that he watches Fox News. And if you look at his Twitter feed, pinned to the top is part of this.
Stone's prosecution was wholly political. It was a shocking insult to the American tradition of equal justice. Obama appointed Judge Amy Berman Jackson, an open Democratic partisan, allowed a former congressional candidate, a Democrat with a history of attacking Stone, to run the jury in the case. Then Judge Jackson stripped Stone of his First Amendment rights. She threatened to send him to jail if he tried to defend himself in public. That's why Roger Stone isn't on this show tonight. He'd go to prison for it. President Trump could end this travesty in an instant with a pardon. Fixing it is the right thing to do, and in the end, that is the only thing that matters.
If you're familiar with Tucker, who's a very good on television, he's reading there. He's reading a teleprompter there. This is not him ad-libbing. So he wrote a script in which he said, essentially, this prosecution is invalid. This judge is a Democrat. This judge is biased. If you know the history of Judge Jackson, she's viewed very fairly, actually, across the political spectrum. But the president has his, shall we say, boombox, and he often listens.
He very often listens. So not only, as Caitlin said, is Tucker helping President lay the groundwork for a potential Roger Stone pardon here, but we've seen with some of the other pardons that he's done over the part of his presidency, that he does take his cues from Fox News. Take former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. His wife went on Fox News to plead for lenience on her husband's behalf, part of the president. That was clearly part of the decision-making process. And we know that the president and his advisors are taking other ways to kind of expand his use of the pardon power. My colleagues at the Washington Post reported that the White House is creating kind of this informal task force to broaden that use, to see who else should be pardoned, whose sentences should also be commuted, led in part by Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. We've also known for some time that the president really does relish his pardon power, because it's one of the powers where the president is basically unchecked. Congress can't do anything about it. No one really can. And that's the other part that's been really appealing to this president.
Well, and as this is playing out, it's a campaign year, too, as well. We'll see. It definitely appeals to his base. The question is, are other voters turned off by it? We're awaiting Judge Amy Berman Jackson right now going through each of the 7 counts against Roger Stone. She is imposing her sentence. We should get that word any moment. We're going to sneak in a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Back to our breaking news this hour. A federal judge in the process of sentencing Roger Stone, the longtime Trump associate and ally, for his convictions as part of the Mueller investigation. And as she sentences Stone and goes through the counts, the federal judge, Amy Berman Jackson, is giving Mr. Stone a tongue lashing. Let's go live now outside the courthouse and CNN's Sarah Murray. Sarah, the judge going through these counts and essentially calling Roger Stone insecure, saying he craves attention, and saying this is all his fault. Don't blame politics and don't blame her.
Yeah, basically. She's also laying out the severity of his crimes. When she was talking about him lying to Congress, she said this is not some secret anti-Trump cabal, but to Congress. She noted that the panel was being headed by a Republican, Devin Nunes, at the time. And yeah, she's not very fond of the way Trump has conducted himself during this trial. That quote you mentioned about Roger Stone's character, she says, at his core, Mr. Stone is an insecure person who craves and recklessly pursues attention. Nothing about this case was a joke. It wasn't funny. She's now walking through how she views the 2 Justice Department sentencing memos, the original one and the revised memo. She's agreed with various parts of both of them. She has said probation only wouldn't be sufficient. So we're still waiting to see what the sentence is she's going to hand down. But she's making it very clear in these remarks that she doesn't feel like Roger Stone has taken this case or his prosecution very seriously. She views his crimes very seriously. And I think what you've seen more broadly in this courtroom is the judge and even the new prosecutors on this case trying to set the record straight, trying to protect the judicial system, trying to lay out that it is not okay to obstruct justice. It is not okay to tamper with witnesses. And the big question now is, what the sentence the judge is ultimately going to land on.
And we should get that momentarily. Sarah Murray will come back to us when we get more color or the sentencing details from the courtroom. Shannon, I just want to get your perspective on this in the sense that the original Justice Department memo, which a lot of people thought was a bit on the harsh side, 7 to 9 years. Main Justice intervened then, which was extraordinary, especially because the president himself was tweeting, let's do something about this. I think this is an outrage. In the case of Paul Manafort, the sentencing guidelines said she could have sentenced him for up to 10 years. She gave him 3.5 years. What is her history? And just put the case and all the politics around it into the context of where you think she's going to come down here.
Well, it's a white-collar defendant. It's not a violent crime. He does not have a history of this. He is an older person. Big help to him is that Randy Credico, the victim of the obstruction, wrote sort of an ambiguous letter saying he didn't feel personally that threatened by it. But the fact is he did make that attempt to obstruct the justice. I thought the 7 to 9 years was highly unrealistic. I mean, I get the prosecutors want a heavier sentence when you've tried the defendant and convicted him, and he's very unrepentant. But I all along thought she's going to be more in the 2 to 3 range.
So one interesting thing she just said about that letter from Credico is saying it says more about him than it does about Stone, and that he just really probably, in her opinion, didn't want to be seen as the reason behind this sentencing today.
Absolutely.
But she did say something else interesting. She just said, he wasn't obstructing to some secret anti-Trump group. It was to Congress, members of both parties, Republicans and Democrats, and she pointed out that the committee that he lied to was at that time headed by a Republican and an ally of the president's, Devin Nunes. So I think she's trying to go ahead and combat what we're going to be hearing from the president's allies depending on how this all ends up.
And to that point, Shimon, she's addressing Roger Stone, but she seems to be addressing the president as well. And all the arguments he has made about the deep state, about a flawed process. She's defending the integrity of the Mueller investigation. She's defending the integrity and the rights of Congress to ask people questions. She's essentially saying, Roger Stone, your excuses do not fly here. And Roger Stone's excuses are the president's excuses.
Right.
Exactly.
She's standing up for the Department of Justice, and she's standing up for justice. This is her moment to stand up to all the attacks from the president in this entire investigation towards the Justice Department, towards judges. That is the whole point of this in the end. There is a larger motivation here, without a doubt. There's been a larger motivation here throughout this entire trial, throughout this entire proceedings. And the fear is that people aren't going to take this seriously. She, in court right now, she's standing up for the Department of Justice, for the prosecutors who filed that initial sentencing memorandum, saying that it was professionally handled, that it was thorough, and any suggestion that the prosecutors did anything improper or unethical is incorrect. She's saying what the prosecutors here did, they were doing their job. This is what they do. These are the guidelines that they go by, and it is for me to interpret them. Now, what she does and whether she agrees something is too excessive, that's the process. But the president interfered in that process, and the attorney general interfered in that process. She's now trying to correct.
Well, that's what's so interesting is that it doesn't sound like she was going to go along with the 7 to 9 years anyway, so they could have just left it, and she likely wouldn't have gone along with it. So
And Shan, this is standard prosecutors. I mean, they always ask for more.
Right. And I think to Shimon's point, we were talking about this earlier, she's really trying to bring home the point to the public, other potential jurors in the future. This matters. I mean, there's a tendency now in the Trump era, jurors may look at this and say, it doesn't matter what we do. This is all a bunch of political nonsense. He's going to pardon everybody. And she's really making an effort to say the system matters. There's integrity. Jurors' jobs are very sacred. Judges' jobs are sacred. And the prosecution's job is sacred.
And if you look at the charges here, 1 count of obstruction of an official proceeding, 5 counts of false statements, including lying to Congress, 1 count of witness tampering. These are very serious allegations, and they want to wave them off as, Mueller witch hunt, Mueller witch hoax. Again, even if you at home believe Mueller was a witch hunt, he was the prosecutor. He had the standing. Even if you believe Congress is a clown car, as to your point too, this was a Republican committee at the time. But Congress is an institution. You cannot lie when you're under oath. This is almost a battle to reset the order in Washington, with the federal judge trying to defend the system at a time she knows the president has been constantly undermining it and may be willing, either within days or hours of this sentencing, or maybe he'll wait till the appeal process plays out, to sign a piece of paper and says, never mind, Roger, you're free.
Definitely. I mean, the president has been trying to upend the system for some time, and you do see, you've seen this judge in particular push back. You've seen Chief Justice John Roberts in an extraordinary fashion over a year ago push back on the president's criticisms of the judiciary, whether he calls them Obama judges or Bush judges. And you've seen Attorney General Barr trying to push back a little bit too, saying that, he wishes he wouldn't tweet so much about the cases. It's been fascinating to watch that Trump-Barr relationship, though, because I think we can all agree it's nowhere near as sour as it was between the president and Jeff Sessions when he was in the Attorney General position. So, what's been Barr's motivation to speak out against the president's comments? Because we know he's not going to stop tweeting. I mean, he's just tweeting about it this morning when he's out on his Western swing. Does Barr, who has been such a stalwart for the president on a lot of these issues, does he eventually get under the president's skin? I think that'd be a really important dynamic to watch.
We'll watch it play out, and The president may give him new exhibits in that tension, if you will, relationship as this day plays out. We're going to take another quick break. We're waiting again for the sentencing of longtime Trump ally Roger Stone for his convictions on 7 counts stemming from the Mueller investigation. The sentencing taking a bit longer than we anticipated because the judge is giving the defendant a tongue lashing. We'll be right back.
I am totally blind. And Non-24 can make me show up too early or too late or make me feel like I'm not really there. Talk to your doctor and call 844-234-2424.
Nerds! Oh, thanks. Presidential town halls, tonight starting at 8 Eastern, only on CNN.
Closed captioning brought to you by Page Publishing. We help publish, distribute, and sell your book.
Have you written a book and want it published? Thousands of authors have with Page Publishing. If we decide to publish you, your work ends and ours begins.
Call for your free author submission kit.
Our breaking news this hour, a crime and punishment story. The longtime presidential ally, Roger Stone, in federal court, right now being lectured by the judge who oversaw his trial as part of the Mueller investigation. Judge Amy Berman Jackson about to impose her sentence on Roger Stone. We know he will get prison time. We do not know how much. She is going through a number of grievances against him as she defends the case brought by the prosecutors in the special counsel Robert Mueller's office, and as she decries Mr. Stone and, by extension, the President of the United States for constantly criticizing the arms of government, including the judiciary, the special counsel's office, and the Congress that were involved in this case, investigation. Shimon Prokupecz is with us, and you've been watching some of the notes coming out from our courtroom team. She is being beyond scathing.
She is being beyond scathing, taking it right to the president at this point, describing the prosecution of Roger Stone. And what she says, and I'm going to quote here, that Roger Stone was not prosecuted for standing up for the president. He was prosecuted for covering up for the president. And that is what this trial was ultimately about. The fact that Roger Stone went before Congress, lied to them, didn't submit information that he should have. And throughout this trial, that was the point the prosecutors had made, that Roger Stone did this to protect the president. And here is what the judge is saying. You were doing this to protect the president. You covered up for the president. And she's using that as part of her sentencing. The other thing I want to make is what she's saying, and I've made a point of this. When Roger Stone's attorneys came into court and they were arguing to the jury, so what? This is no big deal. So what? So what? Prosecutors had obviously a very different take on this. And their whole argument was, this is about truth. This is about our systems. This is about Congress and how you cannot go before Congress and just on your own decide that you're going to lie and obstruct and get in the way of an investigation. And the judge is saying the exact same thing here. So we'll see. We're getting there. We're getting closer. But as she said when she took the bench now about 40 minutes ago, she had a lot to say. And boy, does she certainly have a lot to say here.
She was not lying when she started the proceedings by saying this might take a while because she has a lot to say. And she is central to this in the sense that she, especially among the judges, knows as much about the Mueller investigation, if not more than any, because she's handled so many of the high-profile cases, including, most significantly, the case of Paul Manafort, who was the president's former campaign chairman, who was in jail, Rick Gates, who was the former Trump deputy campaign manager, who then went on to cooperate quite a bit, including in the Roger Stone trial. The president is on the record as saying he doesn't remember Roger Stone ever tipping him off about, hey, WikiLeaks has this information and they're going to release it. Rick Gates testified he was in the car with the president of the United States when Roger Stone called and gave the president a heads up about this. So when Roger Stone's people, as Shimon says, say no big deal, Judge Jackson knows everything, not just what happened in this proceeding, but what she's learned from the other proceedings as well.
Right, and she's doing a great job of that. That is her job, to distill the facts from the advocacy part of it. And you know, what's really interesting, it's a great lesson in civics for people watching this, because there's so much talk these days about perjury traps. And it really tends to disparage the importance of telling the truth under oath, because without the importance of that, the system just doesn't work. And she's really cutting through all that and reminding us this is why false statements counts. This is why lying to Congress counts. And as a good judge, she's got to listen to the advocacy know the facts of her cases and be able to apply the law to those facts. That's what she's doing.
Well, that's what's so interesting is they're not denying Roger Stone did these things. When you're seeing the president's allies, the president himself go out and talk about this, they're not denying that he did all of this, that these charges are false. They're saying he just doesn't deserve such a harsh sentence, and it's just Roger being Roger. This is how he is. You guys knew who he was, this, political dirty trickster that he even described himself as. So that's what's so notable is that they're not denying his conduct. They're just saying he doesn't deserve to be punished for it.
But it also goes beyond that. It goes beyond that in the sense that they're essentially saying that they view this investigation as illegitimate. Therefore, it's okay that you lied to it and that you obstructed. That is a very dangerous path. That you get to decide. Any citizen gets to decide whether or not the prosecution or the investigation of you is legitimate, as opposed to you can go to another judge, you can go to another court, you can hire a new attorney, you can go public and jump up and down and say this is unfair, but that doesn't give you the right to break the law because you think the law is wrong.
Well, delegitimizing investigations has been quite the tactic for this White House, and we've seen that. I mean, we just saw that with the impeachment inquiry and their unwillingness to cooperate with the House by saying what House Democrats were pursuing. They had no right to do so. I mean, clearly they did under the Constitution, but that has been a tactic for the president for some time.
All right, and if you continue the idea inside the courtroom, she understands. The judge, this judge has been attacked by the president. He's called her an Obama appointee. If you go back in time, she was also on social media at one point in a crosshairs coming under attack in this case. In that regard, Shimon, knowing her as you do, how much of this is about her defending her own integrity, or is she compartmentalized enough, if that is the right word, to say, fine, I have been constantly under attack, but I've been at this a few years. Trump may be extraordinary, maybe political attacks on steroids, but I'm just going to keep my head down and bore through it.
I think this is about the greater good and the greater picture here, and that is the justice system for her. I'm certain there's a part of her that is addressing the attacks against her. She's addressed the threats that Roger Stone made against her on social media. The color from the courtroom from our reporter, Caitlin Polantz, who's there, is that she was at times when she was speaking about the importance of this case and what this case was about, is that she was slow, that there was emphasis on certain things, that she paused at certain times. And I don't want to say that she was angry, but there was definitely some emotion from her that you wouldn't normally perhaps see from a judge, because I think she realizes what the bigger picture here is. So I don't think this is so much personal for her, but she could perhaps be speaking for all the judges across the country who find themselves in some way under attack by the president.
Right. It is every day. I wish there were cameras in a federal courtroom, but some days more than others. Let's get straight to CNN's Sarah Murray outside the courtroom with some breaking news. Sarah?
The judge just handed down the sentence. Roger Stone will be getting prison time. He will be getting 40 months in prison. That's what the judge handed down. That pans out to a little bit more than 3 years. Also 24 months of probation, it looks like, on each count. They're still going down, but the big headline here is 40 months in prison. That's what the judge handed down. That pans out to a little bit more than 3 years. Also 24 months of probation, it looks like, on each count. They're still going down, but the big headline here is 40 months in prison for Roger Stone. He is not going to be getting, obviously, the probation time that he had hoped for. That's still well short of the 7 to 9 years that prosecutors originally asked for, but the judge is trying to send a significant message here. She's saying that when you do these things, when you try to obstruct justice, when you try to lie to Congress, when you try to tamper with witnesses, that comes with real consequences. That is the message that she is trying to get across, among many others we've seen in this courtroom today. But the big headline here is 40 months in prison for Roger Stone.
40 months in prison for Roger Stone. Sarah Murray outside the courtroom. Keep bringing us the details as they come out of that courtroom. Let's bring it in the room there. Shannon, I'll start with you in the sense that you had thought we'd be somewhere in the 2 to 3 years range. 3 years and 4 months. That is a significant sentence.
That is a significant sentence. I think it sends a very strong message. I think her tongue lashing of him really pointed out that she took his witness intimidation and obstruction very seriously. She did run them concurrently. That's a very normal thing to do rather than running it consecutively. And she's also adding in the 24 months of probation. It seems like a very solid sentence, sends the right message, and obviously she was not swayed by any passions on either side.
And to the process, just help me with the process here in that he doesn't go to prison today. He has appeals pending. He's still asking for a new trial. So she had said the other day on this conference call, we're going to go ahead with the sentencing on Thursday, and then I will deal with all of that. So Roger Stone is going to walk out of that courthouse.
He's going to walk out. We could hear from him. He's no longer, I would assume, right? He's no longer under the gag order technically because the case is over. He's been sentenced. What's stopping him from speaking?
Can she keep a gag order in place pending appeal, or can she recommend it? Or
she may address that to him specifically. If I were his lawyer, I'd certainly tell him not to make any assumptions about that. So it'd be wise to stay quiet.
So we'll see. We'll see if he gets. I mean, that will be a pretty interesting moment if he does get the opportunity. He chose not to speak in court. I thought that was kind of interesting. Defendants usually show some remorse, or they try to show the judge that they care about something. He chose not to do that in this case.
And if he does speak, the question is, where does he go? Does he give a press conference? Does he go on Fox News, as we saw these other officials, or not other officials, these other beneficiaries of these pardons and these commutations? Does he do something similar to that? That's going to be the next question, is how does the president react to this? And we should note he's out on the West Coast today. He's not coming back to Washington till tomorrow, but he has been watching this incredibly closely, even from afar.
Right, and we know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think some folks, and just, people are going to make a big deal that perhaps that the DOJ wanted 7 to 9 years initially, and the judge didn't agree with them, so somehow that means they were wrong for suggesting such a high sentence. The judge ultimately said they did the right thing. They followed the guidelines here. They followed precedent. They followed what is appropriate here. It is up to me to decide ultimately what to do here. And a lot of prosecutors, I think, realize that. You always go for more because that's precedent. And given the crime here of intimidating a witness, it's a very serious crime. Some folks are going to take it to mean, well, she didn't agree with DOJ. They were asking for too much here. So I don't think people should read too much into that. The bottom line is she said what they did here was the right thing. This is what I think is appropriate, and now we have a sentence of just over 3 years.
And now we wait on the president. We wait to see if Roger Stone will speak when he comes out. We wait to see if Judge Berman Jackson will address the gag order issue as she allows him to leave the courtroom today. There's a couple of months, right, where all this plays out, normally 2 to 3 months before the Bureau of Prisons would get involved, and he has his hearings that are pending. And so we wait now for the president, who, again, if you look at his tweets this morning, retweeting and pinning to the top of his Twitter page Tucker Carlson saying this is an outrage. Tweeting this morning, they say Roger Stone lied to Congress, and then the president trying to say that other people have done this as well. Again, the context of the president's tweets sometimes break the fact-check machine, but all caps fairness at the end of the president's tweet. That is the biggest hint that it is his view, whether it is today, a week or a month from now, or later in the year when Roger Stone's about to report to prison, that this may never happen.
Yeah, and he's used that same, that unfairness rationale for some of the other folks that he has, for sentences that he has commuted a pardon. And the president's first event isn't until almost 3 o'clock our time. So he has plenty of time to be monitoring the news and figuring out what to say. And he, as you point out, he hasn't been shy about what he thinks about the sentence. If a pardon happens, when does it happen? That's a question. I mean, we've been asking him for a very long time if he was ever going to pardon Michael Flynn. And that's a question that we're still asking. But certainly the president will be watching. I would imagine most Republicans in Congress would prefer he not pardon Roger Stone and just kind of let the justice system play out, except for his most closest allies. But again, like we talked about earlier, the president has a lot of power, or has all the power here.
Right, but how many of those members of Congress will have the courage to speak up and tell the president, you've done enough to damage the integrity of the justice system in the last couple of days, sir. Why don't you leave this one alone? And you can laugh at me when I ask you this question, because I think it's going to evoke there are those around the president who say, when you tweet, when you get involved in this stuff, this is what causes the suburban revolt. This is what causes people, independents, formerly moderate Republicans who in 2018 abandoned the Republicans for the Democratic Party. This is what unnerves them. Step back. You're in a campaign election year. Don't do it.
And the question is, what are the lasting effects of something like this on voters when they do go to the polls, if they are? Because that is the thing we do hear when we go to even Trump rallies, where these are the most diehard of the president's supporters who camp out overnight, they wait in line for hours. They are the ones who, when you ask them to say, what is one thing you don't like that the president does? His tweets. So it is something that goes back to that. Clearly, they also wrinkled the attorney general. But stepping back and looking at this, it is still stunning that this is the president's longtime confidant. 30 years, Roger Stone and Donald Trump have been friends. He is one of the first people to encourage him to run for president, and he just got sentenced to over 3 years in prison, the last criminal charges that were filed before Robert Mueller ended his investigation. And it's just stunning to know, as someone who's covered Donald Trump for several years, who knew Roger Stone, and to see that this is how this is ending up, though we still have a question of whether or not he'll actually go to prison for a 1 day, 2 days, or if the president will pardon him. It's still stunning that we are getting here with the president's longtime confidant being sentenced to over 3 years in prison.
And to that point, if you judge a man by the company he keeps, Roger Stone now sentenced to 40 months in prison, Paul Manafort in prison, Michael Cohen in prison, Michael Flynn awaiting sentencing.
Rudy Giuliani
under investigation. And we're going to take a quick break. The courtroom session with Roger Stone has adjourned. The federal judge sentencing him to 40 months in prison. More color from inside the courtroom, more reaction on the outside of the courthouse right there when we come back. Breaking news this hour, a federal judge in that courthouse you see on the right of your screen, they're sentencing Trump ally, longtime Trump associate and friend Roger Stone, 40 months in prison, 24 months probation. He has to undergo substance abuse testing. During that, a $20,000 fine imposed by Judge Amy Berman Jackson against Roger Stone for 7 convictions in the Mueller investigation. We're waiting to see here. You see other people coming out of the courthouse. We're waiting to see if Mr. Stone exits. Shimon Prokopez is with us in studio here. This is the end. This is the end in some ways. I mean, he has a motion for a new trial. He has some other motions. There will be appeals. But in some ways, this is buttoning up a chapter, a big important chapter of the Mueller investigation. And the judge seemed to go out of her way to defend the legitimacy of that investigation.
The entire investigation. Just one part left, and that's in the Mueller investigation. That's the Michael Flynn case. Had that been over, this would have been the end. And that's going to be interesting to see how Michael Flynn winds up. But yeah, I mean, what we saw here from this judge was her words, just standing up for the system, standing up for prosecutors, standing up for this investigation, standing up for the entire, what she called the administration of justice, from the threats that came from Roger Stone to the way he behaved during the course of this investigation to the way he behaved after his arrest. She took issue with all of that.
And the important context of that is she also understands at a time the system is under constant attack from the President of the United States, even though, at least to my knowledge, she did not mention him. I want to go live outside of the courtroom, outside of the courthouse.